Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining from around the world. I think there's people from around the world joining us today. I want to welcome everybody and really thank you for giving us this next hour. This is our live webinar, Audit and Deal Ready, Spot the Gaps because before they cost you a quarter. My name is Marcio Moerbeck, and I will be moderating today's session. So I want to give you some more insight on how we put this together and why we put this together. And the reason is really simple. Uh, Passing an audit once really doesn't mean that your program is still audit ready today. I think between audits, a lot will change. People will leave, new tools are going to get added, new vendors are going to come in, control owners will get new jobs. So much more happens, but I think also we all agree that these changes are normal. The problem really is when the compliance program doesn't keep up with them. So today we're going to put a compliance setup on the screen, and we're going to have a panel of experienced GRC audit and security reviewers walk us through what they would question if a compliance setup is put in front of them. That's really valuable in my opinion. And the setup of reviewing is a composite case. And we have built it from real interviews and the surveys from our business impact survey. And we pulled that from our top customers and teams we bring on every year. And everybody obviously is working toward their compliance goals. So nothing that you see on the screen belongs to any single specific customer, but every gap that you will see is what our customers have run into in real life. So let's get ready for it. So as usual, the traditional housekeeping slide, but I want to make sure that I give you some housekeeping items before we dive in. The session is being recorded, and we're going to send you a replay and any resources afterwards. We've got a couple of live polls come up, so please make sure that you keep an eye out for those. I want to make sure that you participate. And if you have questions throughout, drop it in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of these questions as we can at the end. We have a juicy topic, so we want to make sure that we get to as many of the questions that you have until the end. So let me introduce the people that you want to actually hear from. We have an absolutely amazing group today. First and most importantly here, I want to make sure that I'm moderating, and I'm the guy from Scrut. I've been in marketing. I say 15 years because I don't want to reveal my age, but I've been in marketing for over 25 years, and it's a great pleasure to now be working at Scrut for the past year. I love the team, and I love what we're doing here for GRC. Then we have Ben Rothke. He is a senior information security manager at Experian. Ben has more than 25 years of experience in information security and privacy, and brings a senior security and risk lens today. We also have Dallas Baker, senior GRC analyst at Sensiba. Dallas is a certified ISO 27001 lead auditor and brings the auditor's lens, especially around controls, evidence, and whether claims would actually hold up. And we have Nik Pegler, information security and compliance analyst at Balboa. Nik brings the practitioner lens, looking at whether the process works in the real environment, not just in a tracker or evidence folder. Ben, Dallas, Nik, thank you so much for being here. I'll keep us moving forward, and I'll hand most of the conversation over to you. So before we go any further, I want to set the stage and get a quick pulse on where everyone is at with a quick poll. So you're going to see on the screen right now the very first poll that we have for you. And the poll is the following. What usually triggers your team to recheck whether your compliance setup is still current? Option 1, an upcoming audit. Option 2, a customer security review or deal request. Option 3 is a major system, vendor, or team change. 4 is a leadership or ownership change. And then 5, we don't have a consistent trigger yet. Please vote. We'll give you 30 seconds to do so, and then I'll share the results right there. And obviously, the host and the panelists can't vote. I think a lot of people would think, right, if you have an ownership change, that it will trigger something. Oh, there you go. Thank you, everybody, for voting. Number one won. And let's see here. So an upcoming audit won the vote. And I think it's obvious, right? I think top of mind, out of sight, out of mind for most people, right? So an upcoming audit is really an important trigger, and it kind of almost forces you to start getting back on the road and checking things up. So thank you, everybody, for replying to the poll. So I think the through line here is that Audit-Ready is really not a badge that you earn once, right? It is whether you can prove right now that the right things are happening, and which is exactly what we are about to pressure test. So this is what we're going to look at. And like I told you, right, this is the setup that we have for you. We have a B2B SaaS company providing workflow automation for customer operations. Lots of companies in that space. Late Series A, eyeing a Series B in the next 6 to 9 months. So they are starting conversations around due diligence, they're starting conversations around funding, and they're starting to speak to new investors. They completed SOC 2 Type 2 about 9 months ago, and now they're working on the SOC 2 renewal and starting ISO 27001. So that's the scenario. I'm going to start with Ben first. Let me start with Ben first. Ben, when you look at a profile like this, what is the first thing that tells you their last audit might not reflect exactly where they are today? What do you think?
As that initial mention, you really need to start thinking about the scope and what's in definition. I've been in my current role 7 years. That I've spent about 6 years as a consultant doing compliance audit. And many times I would go in and find the scope has changed significantly. And, in many ways, it's like the scope is really the destination. If a person wants to go to Rome, Italy, and they book a flight to Rome, New York, it's going to, you're not, the destination is not what you want to be. So you need to really understand, have they defined that scope? Have they defined the compliance environment in extreme detail? And that should be documented. And that really is the beginning. That lays the trajectory of their overall audit. And I think you also just want to see what is their approach to compliance. In the sense, it's that every day is. If you remember in school, there was picture day. Everyone came dressed nicely. They got haircuts. They were flossed, etc. When it comes to security and compliance, every day should be picture day. You don't want to be have controls in place just to satisfy an auditor during the audit, because on 6 months, 9 months later, things are going to be messy. You may have a glowing audit report. On the other hand, you may have a very volatile environment.
I love the every day is picture day analogy, because that is true, right? You don't want to have a messy hair day, right? And you don't want to have a day where things aren't right? You always want to dress your best. You also want to, you want to look your best. So that's absolutely true. I agree with you. I absolutely love that analogy. Dallas, from the auditor's chair, they have a SOC 2 report from months ago, right? 9 months ago, in fact, to a buyer asking hard questions right now. Does that report still mean as much as the team thinks it does? Does it mean as much as the team thinks it does, or not anymore? What do you think?
So to start it off, I would definitely say having a SOC 2 report, obtained a clean SOC 2 report, is always going to be a positive. because this will show your buyers that you had effective control operation during that period. However, because there are so many changes and SOC 2 is looking backwards at a historical period of time, the report may not hold up as much as you would think it would. And some new things that I would consider when looking through this issue would be that there are new AI tools added to the environment. They added contractors, they expanded their Redshift usage, they added in new vendors. All of those things are great changes to have, but you have to be able to show during your next audit that your processes were followed with those changes. And buyers are definitely going to want to see that your controls are operating effectively with the newly changed areas, as well as the areas identified in the prior year report. So it definitely holds up, but buyers, I think, will be more interested in how you've applied your governance to the changes upcoming as well in your next report.
That's awesome, and I think you're right. They want to, they trust that you've done some of that work already, right? But I mean, they want to make sure that the work is resilient and persistent, right? So that's I agree with you 100%. Nik, they have a small security and GRC team, right? Right now they have one security lead, a GRC manager. They have some support from IT, support from engineering, legal, and ops. But control owners are spread across these teams, right? In a setup like that, where does ownership usually start to break down, in your opinion?
Ownership typically starts to break down when compliance is treated more as a destination rather than a continuous process. Because the team is small, they're often not looped in the day-to-day sprints of the engineering team or the infrastructure changes of the sales team or ops. When an engineer adds a new service or an IT lead changes a config, they aren't trying to circumvent security, they're just trying to do their job. The breakdown really happens because there's no automated feedback loop. The GRC team finds out about these changes after the fact, often in an audit scramble, rather than when the change actually occurred. It's really only going to be effective when there's effective communication within the teams and when people have the visibility and the tools to understand how their jobs impact broader compliance framework and the overall environment within the company.
You know what? I think you hit the nail in the head here, because this is, as changes happen, right? If teams have really open lines of communication, things get tagged and improved and monitored as these changes come along. If you wait all the way to an audit scramble, you're going to be, there's some debt to pay, right? And then now everybody's freaking out, right? And you don't want to be, with a small team especially, you don't want to be in that panic mode when the audit scramble comes along. You want to be ready. So I agree 1,000% with you. So let's get into the case file. I want everybody to pay attention to I think how we frame what we're working on and how we're going to read it, because it's important that we don't judge one single slide that we're gonna show you in isolation. This is a really weak, really unique webinar, because many times when I hear these types of topics, we discuss things in isolation, and many times we really state things that are generic in nature. But we're going to get into a case that, even though it's not a real case, it is from real data, right? But I don't want anybody to judge each of the slides in isolation. What we're going to do is we're going to be reviewing the same system in 4 ways, right? We're going to show you what exists. We're going to show you who has access, what can be proven, and what changed. So again, what is in place, right? Who has access, what can be proven, and what changed. Because that's really where the story is going to get interesting. The gaps usually don't show up all at once. They compound, right? And they really start to compound as you move from inventory to access, then evidence, then drift. So I think looking at it in these 4 ways will help us frame it well. So we're going to start with systems, data, and ownership. So let's go into the information in a little more detail. Let's get into the actual stack. This screen here that you're looking at right now will list their main systems, who owns each one, what data it touches, and what has changed since the last audit. You will notice that there's a little bit of a mix here, right? There are some long-standing systems like Google Workspace, AWS, and GitHub. That's not a surprise. And then a handful of things that sort of changed or were added after the last audit was over, right? So a question to Dallas here in this specific slide. Dallas, what really stands out to you when you look at this company's footprint on what moved since they were last audited? Are there things around systems, data, and ownership that are important to you that you will be looking at that really stands out to you about this specific case?
For sure. And I think the biggest thing to acknowledge is that their organization's technology footprint has grown significantly since their past audit. So looking at this screen, if we're going to run through some of the changes that initially jump out to me, I would say that they're adding new systems. Their existing tools have been expanded in their environment. If you look through that, not all of their tools are going to be using SSO or MFA. Some of the new tools are also not included in the access review process yet. It also looks like some vendor due diligence is not completed for some of the vendors. And my biggest worry in regard to those areas would be that it looks like some of the new tooling that hasn't had that due diligence done will be having some customer data and their call recordings within them. So that's a big thing to consider when going through this process. And then also some of the tools here are only being adopted by certain teams, and the assigned owners of these systems are spread out across the organization. So with these changes as an auditor, the biggest thing I'm going to be looking at is to see if the areas of identity management, vendor management, access reviews and management, and control ownership has evolved with the organization, and that has all been applied to the new systems and tooling that's being brought into the control environment.
So a couple of things that you called out that are important to me. So the AI tools being added after the audit with no vendor review, I think that's critical, right? That's problematic. It's going to become a problem soon. The call recording sitting outside SSO on a standalone login also may be an issue. So I 1000% agree with you there, and I think those are things that we need to be thinking about moving forward. So if I'm thinking about these AI tools, Ben, AI obviously all the rage. That's all we talk about today, right? As a matter of fact, that probably will be replaced by AI on the next webinar. These tools were added after the last audit. One tool touches support tickets, and another one records sales and customer calls. They haven't completed vendor or security reviews. I called out that there might be an issue. What would worry you the most here? What do you think? And you are on mute, Ben, just like me, just like I was before.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the concern is, with an AI agent, what can they do? And from a 2701 perspective, there's that concern, that they need to be assessed that they're a critical third party, and they can affect the overall ISMS, which is a concern. They could act, independently, potentially, and they could really undermine a lot of controls. If AI has been added to the infrastructure, like every other tool, formal procurement process involving security, compliance, privacy, etc., then that's a good thing. But we're seeing this ramp up, this irrational exuberance with AI. There's a lot of failures, a lot of security issues, and this week, even Ford announced they're recalling a lot of engineers due to the promises of AI that they thought would help them the design and engineering perspective has failed miserably. So it's a significant issue that really undermine an entire compliance program.
That's incredible. We have, those are things that we really need to start thinking about, regarding AI and AI adoption for sure. Nik, some of these tools are touching customer data, right? And they're also touching call recordings. And they are sitting outside the company's main login system. Is that the kind of thing that a buyer security team would catch immediately or not? What do you think?
Oh, they absolutely would. Even if these tools are brought in through legitimate business requests and approved by the team, a buyer's security team is going to flag this during due diligence. They aren't looking for shadow IT, they're looking for inconsistencies in the architecture. When we have systems that touch sensitive data, but those systems operate outside the centralized identity provider, it creates a gap. It's not a policy violation, but it does create a friction point from a practitioner's perspective. This creates significant administrative work because now IT ops has to manually sync user access, manage separate onboarding and offboarding processes, and maintain different audit logs. For a buyer, it doesn't signal that the system is out of scope. It intends that it shows that the company intends to be secure, just that the technical infrastructure hasn't caught up to the business needs just yet.
That's incredible. And I think the thing that we want to make sure that we have visibility, right? And we want to make sure that we're allowing people to do their work without getting everybody into trouble, right? I agree with you 1,000%. Dallas, one more for you. If a team is quietly adding 3 to 4 new tools since their last audit, and the way they did it, right? In your opinion, what is the simplest way to make sure none of these tools fall out of scope? What would be your advice for this specific team?
I would say the best approach would be to make sure that vendor reviews and due diligence is performed on these tools and vendors prior to them being implemented. And ideally, in a perfect world, this would be through a formal vendor intake process. This really is the organization's best opportunity to review the tool, assess the risk, assign an owner, and go through their compliance program to see which controls are applicable to which tools as well. It really helps to ensure that a tool is incorporated into your governance process rather than being discovered during the next audit, and possibly missing key pieces of evidence that are required for those new tools. So I know it's kind of an ideal world, but if you could have that vendor intake process where you perform all of that work upfront, it can really save you in the long run.
I think it's clear that before we move on, I think it's clear that you have here a case where 2 AI tools went in, no vendor review, both touch customer data, and I think everybody should be asking themselves the following question, right? If you're looking at in the ranking against everything else, right? And I will ask that question to you, Dallas. Looking at these changes, are the AI changes, are the addition of the AI tools the most important change that you would see against all of the other changes that happened in the system? Is that the things that jump out at you the most?
I think mostly because it does have that customer data aspect, yes. When we talked about the customer call recordings and things being possibly pushed through those AI systems and not behind the corporate login, I think that's kind of my biggest concern there.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we know what exists and who owns it, right? So now we need to see who actually can get in, right? So we're going to get into access and identity reality. So I'll give everybody a few seconds to kind of glance at the slide. There's a lot of information for you here. I told you this was going to be, real information here. And this is the access picture, right? For each system, you are seeing how many people can get in, how many of them are admins, how many are contractors, which accounts sit outside the normal login, and when access was last reviewed. I want you to take a few seconds to scan that last review column on the right. This is really, really important. So if you look from left to right, the last review column is the one that we want everybody to pay attention, right? So, and I think that's the column that everybody's eyes would immediately go to, right? I would possibly think that that's the column that everybody would start to think about. So I'm going to start with you, Nik. You live in this world day to day, right? That's what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Looking across this whole screen, where does your eye goes to first? Where does it go to first, in your opinion?
I mean, to me, I look directly at the last review column. When I see never reviewed, that's a glaring indication of a problem. As a practitioner, I know that manual review is just a placeholder for eventual failure. We've all seen screenshots in a folder approach. It's meant to look like an audit trail, but it fails to prove that access is actually controlled. An auditor's not looking for the fact that a review happened. They're also looking for evidence of remediation. Did we actually remove user access when they were offboarded? Was a new user account created in a timely manner? If the process isn't tied to our core infrastructure, such as the users that are outside of the scope of IAM, we're just maintaining a paper trail that doesn't reflect the technical reality, which is a major red flag for any investors.
Famous last words, right? Manual review. It's a famous last words for sure. Dallas, a few of these were last reviewed a while back, right? Two of them say never, and one of the reviews was basically just screenshots saved in a folder. From your auditor's chair, what is the difference between having done a review and being able to prove that you did one, right? We know there are differences there. So what are your thoughts?
For sure. And this is one of the areas that I see organizations get tripped up on most is they do usually just have screenshots in a folder. That's a very real world example there. So going into this, performing the access review is only going to be half of the control of what we're testing for. From an auditor's perspective, we need evidence to show that the review actually occurred to cover the control. And at a minimum for this, we would want to see who performed the review, what system it was performed on, when it was completed, what was reviewed, and the remediation items, kind of like Nik mentioned before, to see what was actually done based on the findings of the access review. Screenshots in a folder would not provide us with all of these details. And without the evidence showing all of those details, we really cannot verify that the control actually operated effectively. You can say that you performed an access review, but we cannot say that the full control was covered from that evidence alone.
Awesome. Ben, this screen has break glass accounts, logo accounts, dormant users, contractors, and service accounts. So all types of accounts. Which of these types of accounts usually create the most risk when teams assume access is under control? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that word is a scary word when it comes to compliance, but the nature of service accounts is such that they'll have a password, and that's going to stay the same forever or for years, for decades. So if it is a extraordinarily strong password, 50 characters complex, then that's generally okay. But if it is not like that, those type of service accounts, admin accounts, that are left unsecured and have global access. That is a perfect storm for security.
I have a quick follow-up for you, Dallas. The Zendesk review exists, right? It says it exists, but it's screenshots in a folder. Would you accept that as evidence? And if not, what would you ask for instead?
So it depends on how it's evidenced, but most of the time that's not going to fully cover it. What we want to see is usually a full export from the system showing the parameters of the export that were used as well. So if it was for certain dates, certain roles, things like that, to kind of verify that the access being pulled is actually accurate. And then the really important part is any remediation items from the findings of that export. But just screenshots in a folder will usually not cover it when it comes to the access control review.
Well, that's a good follow-up. Thank you. I wanted like a tangible example, right? Because I think a lot of people would ask that question. Well, this is what I have. What can I provide you that would actually work? So thank you for that. Well, they have the systems, they have the access. Now the real question, can anybody prove any of this is working, right? So what we're going to do now, we're going to look at what's happening on the evidence side of things, right? And again, lots of information on the screen. So please, we have a lot of people on the webinar. Make sure that you take a few moments to parse out the information that you see on the screen. And this screen now is all about proof, right? For each control, you can see where the evidence comes from, how this evidence is being collected, how often, and when it was last gathered. I want you to notice specifically, so let's pay attention to how much of that collection method column says it is manual collection. And I was complaining to Nik about manual collection before, right? Manual reviews. So that's really, really important to hone in. Dallas, I'll start with you. This is right up your wheelhouse, right? And what jumps out at you about how this company is proving its program actually holds up? What are your thoughts there?
For sure. So, to start with the good things that I notice, I see that every control is assigned to an owner. They do have a frequency of collection. It's defined and tracked there. And there's a storage location for each piece of evidence, which that really sets a good foundation for evidence collection. But it's really important to keep the evidence as up to date as possible. And the manual evidence collection, that's where we'll start to see some cracks usually. The thing that stands out most to me here, kind of like you mentioned, is that the evidence collection is majorly manual. Also, that it's being stored in multiple different locations. That can kind of make things a little messy when it comes time to find the evidence for the auditor. Also, as companies grow, it can bring up some additional challenges. So it would possibly increase the likelihood that evidence is not collected on time, or that the evidence collected is stored somewhere where you can't find it, or that the evidence itself is not efficient. This can really make it difficult to provide proper evidence when the auditor is asking for it. We really need to ensure that the control is operating effectively through the whole audit period. So timely evidence and being able to provide it at the end of the audit is really important. And this is a way the manual evidence definitely can cause a lot of problems when it comes to providing proper evidence.
Ben, if a buyer or an auditor asks this team for proof tomorrow, they want proof tomorrow, which of these do you think they could hand over with confidence? And which of them would mean a fair amount of scrambling for that team? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think, manual is often considered a dirty word and automated is considered a great word. So, in this organization, they have a relatively small number of users and admins. So manual review is not necessarily such a bad thing. It's definitely manageable. So if you could, show that it's done, it's reviewed, there is oversight, there's, good documentation, that will be adequate and suffice from an evidentiary perspective to an auditor. That's a reasonable approach. If you're dealing with Boeing with 300,000 employees, manual review certainly won't cut it. But in this organization, it's still small enough you can get by. It's a reasonable approach.
And in this case, so Nik, so much of this evidence depends on someone doing that manual work, right? So Ben said, hey, manual can work for an organization of this size. But I think the case for automation here is that so much of this evidence depends on someone remembering to export, upload, refresh something manually, right? What are the real world pros and cons when proof depends on that much human follow through? What are some of the things that you as a practitioner you're thinking about?
So, I mean, as it's just already been mentioned, a smaller organization, a lot of the processes will be manual, and it is totally doable. But the problem is that it's completely unscalable. So as the organization starts to grow, which they are definitely looking at doing because of wanting to migrate from to actually having investors. The problem with this is when you rely on human follow through, you're introducing a persistent point of failure into your security posture. You end up having situations where you're not monitoring your controls daily, but instead you're scrambling to generate evidence whenever an auditor or a client comes knocking. By that point, it's almost always stale. I strongly recommend automation where feasible, but where not feasible, you need to at least automate the reminders for your evidence collection. I do it through ITSM tickets. I have ITSM tickets that are automatically created daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, just so that way we can make sure that things are not missed.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think, there's, even when it is manual, it is not, right? Because you do have to have some sort of productivity system behind you to support you in that manual collection process. You're never going to just manually remember everything, right? So I think your ITSM tickets idea is absolutely appropriate here. Let's go to the last screen, and what we're going to do is, this is the basic story of the year, right? Every change since the audit, the changes are in order, and what each of these changes touched. The support team grew, contractors expanded, new analytics came online. We talked about the 2 new AI tools that went in, and a risk register that has not moved since the last audit closed. So this is kind of a prioritization moment. So I want to go quickly around the panel and discuss what we see on the screen. I'll start with you, Nik. None of these changes look dramatic on its own, right? It is all normal growth. The team is growing, the company is doing well. How does a stack of perfectly ordinary changes add up to a real readiness mess, a real readiness problem? When does it start to compound into a problem for you?
Well, this is the classic adage of a death by 1,000 cuts. If you look at the timeline, you see normal business growth, new hires, new tools, new analytics. Individually, these are all positive things. Collectively, they completely change the architecture of your environment. If you don't have these changes mapped against the risk register, you create drift. When you're testing a completely different environment than you were 9 months ago, you're relying on the same evidence folder from the last audit. That drift is going to cause a big gap in your compliance system. That it's not necessarily malicious. It's just that you haven't kept up with business growth, and you need a system that alerts you to that drift before it becomes this major.
Absolutely. Ben, from a security perspective, from a security and risk lens, if this team could only recheck one or two things first, right? Where would you point them? What has the highest chance of creating real risk, real buyer concern, or just overall audit friction? What are the things that are top of mind for you there?
Yeah, I'm probably main thing is, access reviews, access control, because, they do have a lot of admin accounts. If those are breached, then the repercussions are going to be, significant. On the other side, they seem to be taking, compliance quite seriously. But you want to see, how's their overall information security infrastructure. Take all of the audit programs, 2701, HIPAA, GDPR, et cetera, you punch them, there's probably going to be an 80% overlap. So, one of the problems with compliance is they take a very narrow approach, think SOC 2, SOC 2, SOC 2, and forget about security from a holistic perspective. If you've got good, robust, formal security controls in place, you can handle any new compliance regimen thrown at them. But access control is the Achilles heel there, because that's what attackers are going for. The MGM ransomware attack, they're going after the help desk. They're going after admins with root access. So if that's not secure, if that's at risk, then that increases significant danger to the organization.
And let me close this out with you, Dallas. And I think everyone watching the session, right? And I think everyone watching who is between audit cycles right now, this might be good advice for them. What is the one habit that keeps a list like this from turning into a surprise at the next audit or at the next deal? What's your advice for everybody who's listening in?
So definitely, I think one of the best habits is just having some form of periodic governance review between your audit cycles. And my biggest suggestion would be, rather than preparing once a year or doing it based on a calendar schedule, tying this review to when there are significant changes in the organization. So, for example, if you're bringing on a new system, a new vendor, a new process, a whole new team, by your process, they should automatically start off some conversations around risk, which controls will be applicable to the change, and what evidence is going to be required for the upcoming audit. This can really help you stay audit ready and not have to scramble for evidence once the audit period is already over. It also helps you ensure that your governance process is keeping up with all of your changes within the organization and not falling behind. So that's when I've seen the most success, is when periodic reviews are performed when a significant change is coming. Then everything can be taken into account before the next audit cycle ends.
Yeah, I think the if you look at the screen, you have an enterprise buyer who is already asking for deeper evidence, right? So I think for this case, the pressure is live, right? The pressure is on. It's not hypothetical. And again, there is no single change here that kind of jumps at you, right? I think the accumulation of drift is the risk, right? And I would presume that this is the case for many companies like this company that we're looking, this fictional company that we're looking at. Normal growth creates the gap. It's not one dramatic change that creates the gap, right? So I'm going to go to the second poll. Thank you, Dallas. Let's take one more quick read of the room. And here is the second poll of the day. So as we close the case, right, takes a little bit for the poll to come up. After seeing this case, right, these 4 slides, what would you be most likely to revisit in your compliance program? Now it's you, right? Would you care about whether new tools, vendors, or AI apps are fully in scope? Whether evidence is fresh, easy to find, and easy to explain? Whether access reviews still reflect current users' roles and systems? And whether risk registers, control owners, and mappings are up to date. So we'll give you guys a minute to vote, and we'll come back with the results. I know which one I would choose from the answers that you guys gave. I feel prepared to answer this one. All right. So the winner is whether risk registers, control owners, and mappings are up to date. I actually would vote for that one, or I would vote for the access reviews still reflect current users' roles and systems. I from the answers, and I'm not an expert, of course, but I'm thinking access is a big deal. From the answers that you guys have provided so far. Now we're gonna play a little game now, and we always try to make this a little more fun, because if I just ask questions randomly, it's just not fun. So we're gonna do a little game. We're gonna play a game of agree, disagree, or on the fence. And I'm gonna get a statement out there, right? I'm gonna ask one of the panelists directly if they agree, disagree, or on the fence, and then we'll ask for some comments. So the first statement: a gap assessment right before the audit is already too late. Ben, do you agree, disagree, or are you on the fence? How early should teams start looking for gaps before the audit pressure is already on?
General consensus is, the halfway point between the audit and the next audit. So, 6 months before the next audit is a good amount of time to look at gaps.
So you disagree? So then you agree with the statement?
I agree wholeheartedly.
You agree? Okay, got it. All right, so let's go to the next card. We'll do. Oh, actually, you know what? Let me do a quick follow up, because this refers to you, Dallas. Dallas, what should trigger a recheck between audits? That's an important question.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it goes back to kind of my last answer too, when significant changes are happening. So if you're seeing a change in business process, technology, vendors, organizational structure, I think that's a great time to reassess everything. But also, as Ben mentioned, I'd say at the halfway point, that's also a great point to sit down and reassess things. But with this organization having so many changes happening rapidly, I would say as changes occur, maybe group some of the changes together, but make sure that everything is really up to date with the new things being brought into your control environment.
Thank you. All right, let's go to the second card. So Nik, let's see if you agree, disagree, or are you on the fence on this statement. A good compliance program should fix every gap with the same urgency. Nik, where do you land on this? Do you agree, disagree, or are you on the fence? How should teams decide what to fix first when audit friction, security risk, buyer concern, and business effort are not the same thing? What do you think?
I strongly disagree. Even with vulnerabilities, they tell you that you should prioritize vulnerabilities. It's the same with gaps. You have to prioritize your gaps. You base it on the business and security risk. If there's just a documentation gap, I mean, it's annoying but manageable. But if there's a control gap, that's obviously going to need to take priority. If you treat every gap as a 5-alarm fire, you're going to burn out the team and eventually stop treating the critical gaps with the seriousness that they deserve. You have to be strategic and prioritize your gaps to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to adequately protect not just your compliance program, but your customer data as well.
Awesome. So quick follow-up to Ben. Just very quick, Ben. Nik mentioned about this risk of treating everything as the same, right? what is what is the danger of treating all of these gaps equally from a risk standpoint, in your opinion?
I mean, we're focusing on, all the wrong thing. You go to your doctor, certain, they do a CBC, a blood count, certain things which are off a little, could be significant. Certain things that are off a little could be, insignificant. You need to really look at that big picture because there's limited staff, limited budget, and there's plenty of risks that you don't have to worry about. That's one of the problems. People see their test results from a physician and things might be in the red. They call the physician and say, my magnesium levels elevated, and the physician will say nothing to worry about because they understand the big picture. But if you take every 911 call as sending out the SWAT team, then it's clearly a broken approach.
I love that analogy. Every 911 call will send a SWAT team.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Like, oh, that, got a small burglary, shows up, a SWAT team shows
Yes,
up. That's great. All right, let's do card number 3. All right. Controls should fit how teams actually work, but the evidence should make sense to someone outside the team. Actually, no. Let's see. Yes, I am reading the right card. I want to make sure. I want to get to the third card. Thank you. Let's go to the third card. Continuous compliance takes less effort and stress than trying to get audit ready right before the deadline. Sorry for reading the wrong card. Nik, do you agree, disagree, or are you on the fence about this? In practice, does continuous compliance make life easier, or does it just move the work earlier? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think my example I gave earlier of the ITSM tickets shows that I agree with this 100%. The way I highly recommend and the way I do it is I treat the compliance program just like a maintenance program within the military. By doing the work periodically throughout, you're making it bite-sized, you're making it more manageable. If you do, let's say, for example, third-party vendor risk management, and you have 50 vendors, if you break that up into once a month, then you only have to do a couple of vendors a month rather than 50 all in one go.
Agree with you 1,000%, right? The joke where they say, "How are you going to eat an elephant?" Right, one bite at a time. So that's how it always works. Let's do the last statement. So the last statement is controls should fit how teams actually work, but the evidence should make sense to someone outside the team. And obviously that's for you, Dallas. Do you agree, disagree, or are you on the fence? How the teams balance practical workflows with proof that an auditor or customer reviewer can actually trust? What do you think?
Definitely agree with that statement. So we always say that controls should support the way that your business actually operates. You should not be forcing processes and things solely for the purpose of compliance. But at the same time, you need to be able to show and provide consistent evidence that clearly demonstrates that the controls were performing properly throughout the whole audit period. So you should work on designing controls around your existing business processes, not around the audit as you go through. And then after that, when comes time for evidence collection, really need to make sure that the evidence clearly answers the basic questions that an auditor would ask, which would be who performed the control, when was it performed, what was performed, and what actions were taken based on the control as well. If your evidence can answer these questions without requiring a lot of additional explanation, it should allow you to have a pretty straightforward audit without a lot of follow-ups or back and forth with your auditor.
I
Thank you,
actually
Dallas.
respectfully disagree with Dallas on one aspect.
Oh, I like it. I like
The
it. We got saucy here. I like it. Spicy. I like it.
In the majority of cases, yes, in the majority of controls, yes, the controls should fit how the teams work, but there are certain controls that are non-negotiable, for a lack of a better way of putting it. Segregation of duties, for example. You cannot have an information security team also configuring the network. That violates segregation of duties. So in that case, you might need to change how the team is configured in order to meet the controls. But like I said, in most cases, yes, the controls should fit how the teams actually work, but there are a few exceptions.
So let me go back to that because I have a follow-up on that. So is this an issue of over designing these controls? Meaning, somebody comes to you and says, hey, this is how things, should operate. Are we over designing the controls to make them look good on paper, but they're not surviving your day-to-day work? Does that relate to this issue or not? What are you thinking about
I think it's more
about
that
that
in a
specific?
lot of frameworks that the controls are designed for more enterprise level organizations and doesn't really
Interesting.
match with the realities of a lot of SMBs, like the case study we were looking at definitely falls within an SMB. I mean, they have one security person, they have IT, they have GRC, but in a lot of SMBs, they don't even have that separation like that. A lot of times you have IT, and you might have one person doing security, or the person doing security might officially be IT, but they're just so happen to be more knowledgeable about security than a lot of the other IT. And then that security person essentially takes over the mantle of compliance just simply because it is somewhat closely married to security.
Final follow-up for Dallas. So Dallas, given what Nik spoke as a practitioner and given what you said, is there a place where fitting the workflow quietly becomes we can't prove it to anyone outside? Is there a kind of a boundary where we say, we can't prove any of this to anyone outside of this enterprise, of this business, I would say?
Yes, and I think it really comes back to the evidence collection piece. We definitely have been given some evidence where it probably does make sense to the internal team completely, but then when we review it, we just can't see what's actually being done there. So I guess that's the most important piece. And then also with these other areas where maybe you have to change your process around it too, always really good to assess the risk with that as well, add it to your risk assessment, assess any risk on those process changes as well. But yes, I think the evidence collection and being able to explain it to someone outside is definitely a big piece of that.
Thank you. So we're going to open up for questions. We have time for maybe one or two questions the most because we're running up on the top of the hour. I'm going to take a look at okay, we got a question here. So let's see. This one is for you, Dallas. For a smaller company with about 40 to 50 employees, let me go back because it just popped up and disappeared on me here. For a company with about 40 to 50 employees, what should be more prioritized when preparing for an audit? What do you think?
Yeah, so really the starting point that we like to see is that your policies are stating what you're actually doing. A lot of times, smaller teams will take policy templates and not update them to reflect what's actually happening. So then when we go to test, we're testing for a process that never actually existed. So I think that's a really important starting point. And then going from there, after your policies reflect what you're actually doing, prioritizing collecting evidence around controls. But I think your policy set is kind of your starting base. And then you would move into your controls and actually begin to collect evidence for them as you go along.
Thank you, Dallas. So we're coming up on time. I'm going to close this one out. But I want to say a few things before we're done. There's one thing to take with you. I think it is this. Again, passing your last audit proved that your program at that specific moment was okay, but that is already gone, right? I think the real question is whether things match how your company works today, because this is the version that the auditor, a buyer, or actually your own board is going to test. That's the version that they're going to care about. The gaps don't announce themselves. They compound quietly. They compound between audits. And it's really the small changes that nobody is rechecking, right? So I think that's the lesson that we take out of the session. I really want to thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank you, Ben, Dallas, and Nik for a really sharp conversation and for sharing your insights. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining. I'm going to send you the recording. We're going to send you some other materials. There's a survey that we created and a gap assessment workbook, and that's going to be on your inbox shortly. And as always, I want to remind you to stay secure, stay compliant, and we'll see you here next time. Thank you again. Goodbye.